Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very first online webinar. Webinars are all online. This is our very first webinar, and we're joined by guests from the USA, from the UK, and from Pakistan. And so I'm really excited to be doing this. But before we start, I'm just going to give a brief introduction about Interfaith Exchange. Interfaith Exchange is a collaboration led by myself, Mary, and Porter, who I'll introduce shortly. And we aim to produce accessible and engaging interfaith dialogue through a range of multimedia platforms, including blogs, webinars like this one, and also we're going to be branching out into creative videos soon. The initiative seeks to promote interfaith discussion among young people and to tackle intolerance, hatred, and discrimination, whilst encouraging mutual respect and understanding. And so today's topic is interfaith in the world of lockdown and how different challenges we face in lockdown and how faith and interfaith can play into that. We'll begin with introducing one of our guests from Pakistan, Hussain Nadim. Hussain Nadim is the CEO of the Nerve Center, which is a policy think tank based in Lahore, Pakistan. He's studied in multiple institutions in the West, including Oxford, Cambridge, George Washington, and he got his doctorate from the University of Sydney. He's also served as the senior expert on Pakistan at the United States Institute of Peace, and he has an interest specifically in how peace and development are related. And so I'm just going to ask him to present for 4 to 5 minutes about, well, I'm not quite sure what he's going to talk about, but yeah, Hussain, over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Rahim, Mary, and everyone else for the invitation to speak over here on this important subject. Since I only have 4 to 5 minutes, I'm not going to go into the long introductions of things. So I'm just going to get straight to the point on what I think about the interfaith dialogue in the growing situation that we're facing right now, Corona epidemic and the post-Corona world order. But to understand that, I think first of all, we have to go back into looking at where we're coming from. Because unless and until we don't understand how we are being evolving, we can't understand where exactly we're going to be going and what the options we have. So I'm going to start off with the Westphalian system and the society that emerged after that, because it is important. It's very important at the moment, because I think what we're seeing today in this world is the undoing of the Westphalian order. After the Westphalia, we saw a mushrooming of nation states and identity of the people around the idea of nation, identity, and all of that. I think with that also emerged the new ideas of democracy, freedom, rights, etc., etc. Now, this was particularly started off in the Western society, sprung by the Western ideas and a lot of intellectual enlightenment that happened in the Western countries and the Western hemisphere. They were in the later time during the colonization period, they were pushed on to the Eastern societies, which had a different evolution and a different mindset on things. For instance, the nation state was a rather very strange idea of societies in the East, where religion, for instance, was the key mobilizing and factor and the key identity of the people. So the reason why I wanted to bring awareness to that is because what I see right now in the world is that tension emerging between the two worlds, where initially the nation states started defining the states, but the religious identity is now fighting back. What we have seen in the past century is exactly that. You look at the creation of the state of Israel, you look at the creation of the state of Pakistan around the religious identity, you'll see that. You look at the 1979 Iranian Revolution, you'll see that again. And then you look at the entire trend where you talk about Islamic extremism, Islamism, that essentially is about pushing back against that Westphalian order that artificially identified people based on geography, not based on their faith, religious identity and all. So we see a lot of movements, some Salafi movements, some became more radical and extremist like Al-Qaeda and other movements. So that's what has been there. Initially, these identical movements based on identity were only in the eastern part of the world. But what we have seen lately, ever since 9/11, is a particular movement starting all over the world. I mean, you look at the rise of populist movements in the US, in UK. You look at the rise of Hindutva in India, for instance. And all over the world, you're seeing these hotspots where religion is becoming more and more central to the governance and the state and the society, which is very fundamentally important for us because our ideas on interfaith dialogue and the whole essence of interfaith initially rested upon our neoliberal understanding of religion, society, and faith. That now is almost entirely collapsing. So, what I want to get at in the next 1 or 2 minutes is what's going on and where we are headed. What's going on is very simple. A lot of things that were supposed to happen in 15 to 20 years, because of COVID, they have accelerated. We've seen that digitalization process has started accelerated. We've seen that the mindset, the economy, the way of doing business has shifted. In that context, I think what is very important is that interfaith also has to evolve. The dialogue between communities, who is leading these dialogues, how they are being led, what type of narratives are we talking about? I think that is under the question, specifically at a time like Corona, where the society and the world has faced a collective threat from a very from something out of negligence or some unknown reason that we still don't know yet. It kind of draws back our attention to the fact that beyond these superficial ideas on race, religion, etc., that we have divided ourselves into, at the end of the day, we have the same blood, we have the same sort of DNA that gets targeted by the viruses, and we suffer in the same particular way. Henceforth, I think it is important, and I don't rely on the community leaders or the religious clerics to be in a position to lead that interfaith dialogue moving forward because they have been used to a very traditional sort of interfaith dialogue in the speech. I think the younger generations of each and individual religions, I think that is for them to come up, use the digital age, use the technology to move forward with how to best interact, how to best cooperate, how to best understand each other. And a lot of times the focus, unfortunately, in the last 15 to 20 years was the focus was a lot on building bridges, and the narrative was entirely about how we are similar and not different. I think we need to slightly shift that and have a sort of more understanding how being different is actually a good thing as well, instead of only focusing on what is common between us. I think we can really be in a good position to appreciate what divides us and build on top of that to actually come to terms with our differences. And I think that would be a good way to start off. I'll stop at there, and then we can have more discussion during the question and answers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Hussain. Next, I'm going to call on Mary Hunter. Mary Hunter is one of the co-founders of Interfaith Exchange. She's a graduate from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, where she graduated in theology. She wrote her undergraduate dissertation on extremism in Pakistan and has also had her writing published in some Pakistani newspapers. She was brought up in a Christian tradition, but identifies as an agnostic now, and is currently working as a postgraduate research fellow. So Mary, over to you.
Thank you, Raheem, for that. I'd also like to say thank you first to the other speakers on the webinar. It really is a pleasure to be sharing a platform with Rubab and Hussain, who are very distinguished individuals. And also thank you to Raheem and Porter for, getting this going, which I know it was kind of like a love child of ours, this webinar and the initiative. So it's really exciting to be doing this with you guys today. First I'd like to start with, in terms of interfaith dialogue and lockdown, is we have a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities that I think it's presenting. So one of the main challenges is kind of the exacerbation of interreligious tensions. Particularly in the UK, we've had a lot of examples of kind of corona-induced fear and suspicion. So we have cases where people from different communities are turning on one another and reporting each other to the police because they believe that the other is breaching corona guidelines. So there's a good example of some Muslims who were celebrating Eid, and they were in an enclosed area, and they had made sure that there were 2 meters between them. But from a certain angle which the picture was taken, it made it look like they weren't. And, this was shown around, and the problem is when people take a picture out of context, then it can lead to things like that. And there are even worse cases of this in other countries. So, for example, in India, there's been a spread of a conspiracy theory called Corona Jihad, which is basically a suggestion that Muslims are deliberately spreading corona in order to infect Hindus. And there was a case where a young man was kidnapped, beaten, and told that he had to convert to Hinduism in order to go to the hospital. So a lot of challenges are being posed in terms of tensions between different religions, and in terms of our youth, this is a problem because they will see this as an example, and they will tend to imitate us and adopt these kind of opinions which aren't based on fact. They're based on suspicion and fear that people have of one another. But though there are a lot of these bad things happening, during the lockdown, there is a lot of good and a lot of opportunities also. So, for example, this very webinar wouldn't be happening, if there was no corona. So we would often rely on a conference in person. There are 3 different countries being represented here, and we'd have to coordinate flights or whatever and go to one country. So we're making interfaith dialogue more accessible during the lockdown by taking part in webinars such as this. And this is particularly good actually for young people as well, because though generational characteristics can be kind of stereotypes and blanket characterizations, Generation Z, so our generation and those that will follow, are the first ones that are native born into technology. So for them, during this lockdown, the more dependence on technology is actually a strength for young people. And so for them, engaging in dialogue like we're doing now is actually perhaps easier than it would have been in the past. And because of our dependence on social media, we're more inclined to be interested in diversity. We're more interested in other people. So both the technological advances and our interest in others actually means that during lockdown, we're more likely to engage in this kind of dialogue, which I think is a really important thing. Yes, so, and I just conclude by saying, we have a choice now as people of our age and people who are older than us in terms of either encouraging this fear and suspicion that people have been spreading during the lockdown, or we can choose, dialogue. We can choose to have mutual respect and understanding for others based on dialogue. So it's, our example, we have to actually do something in order to, form the next generation and encourage them to have respect for other people. So yeah, if we want to, encourage change in the next generation, then we have to be that change. So I'd say encouraging interfaith dialogue is what we should do. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Okay, our next speaker is Rubab Mehdi Rizvi. Rubab has a background in law and is well known in the interfaith world, both in the UK and in Pakistan. He has organized interfaith events in British Parliament, worked on the acquittal of Asia Bibi in her decade-long blasphemy case in Pakistan, and he's currently chairperson of the Imam Hussain Council. She usually works behind the scenes, so we're really happy that she's agreed to be with us today. So Rubab, over to you.
I would like to congratulate Mary Hunter and Interfaith Exchange for their first webinar, which I hope will be the first of many more successful initiatives. And we must never underplay the fact that over 84% of the world's population identify with a religious belief or tradition, and so have earned their right to have a voice or to be heard. There is a growing recognition for religious leaders with their unique grassroots influence as being advocates for a dialogue-based solution and in enhancing their role as inseparable partners to policymakers in peace building and in countering extremist narratives, be they religiously or politically driven. There will be no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. There will be no peace among the religions without dialogue among the religions. Equally well, there can be no peace without equality. Existing religious and ethnic minorities have been increasingly viewed as outsiders rather than equals with shared and common citizenship. Root cause of all violence is socio-cultural programming of inequality. Holocausts do not start with gas chambers, but with words. It would be within reason to count on the future leaders to change mindsets. Let's examine the legal position and societal attributes when it comes to equality. We have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1, Article 2, more importantly, Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief. As far as UK is concerned, freedom of religion, faith, belief are enshrined in human rights jurisprudence. All guarantees under the convention have been written into UK law by statute. Ministers of the Crown and others, when making strategic decisions about the exercise of their functions, are required to have regard to the desirability of reducing socioeconomic inequalities to reform and harmonize equality law. This has been best explained in Equality Act 2010, Section 10. The Human Rights Act 1998 sets out the fundamental rights and freedoms that everyone in UK is entitled to. Article 9 protects your right to freedom of thought, belief, and religion. It includes the right to change your religion or beliefs at any time. Now coming to Pakistan, Prince Ali Khan, Pakistan's representative to the UN, said the relevant provision of our constitution under which Pakistan became a democratic republic on the 23rd of March 1956 lays down Section 5:1, all citizens are equal before law and entitled to equal protection of law. The Constitution further nullifies as void any law, custom, or usage which is inconsistent with the fundamental rights to equality under the law, which is enforceable right under an independent judiciary and the Supreme Court of Pakistan. This means that the non-Muslims are guaranteed equality with Muslims under the laws of Pakistan. And while it is true that the President of Pakistan must be a Muslim, he is in fact the symbol of the state, and the executive powers are vested almost exclusively in the Prime Minister and his cabinet. Pakistan is not unique in basing its political institutions on fundamental religious concepts. For example, a number of European nations such as Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Ireland, Greece, and UK restrict the office of the head of the state to those who profess the predominant religious beliefs of their country. So what is the position when it comes to societal attitudes today? Bernard Henry Levy, the French celebrity philosopher, has coined the phrase that the period in which we are living in is the age of madness. We divide by sect, we divide by language, by caste, by biradri, by tribe. We think that we know one another, but we don't. We have opinions about one another, but we do not have knowledge. Maybe we should direct our appeal to everyday people. Let even a small number of ordinary people, men and women, make up their minds that as long as it lies in their power, there will be no coercion in our lands, that people will not be punished for their views, their beliefs, or for belonging to their religion, their caste, their poverty, their dissenting sects. We could learn about governance and humanity from some examples from the past. How many politicians and media pundits know of Babur's beautiful letter written just before he died to his son Humayun, who was the next emperor of India? "Oh, my son," he begins the letter, "keep your heart cleansed from religious bigotry. See that temples and abodes of worship of every community should not be damaged. Bring together the diverse religions, in particular, refrain from the sacrifice of cows, and dispense justice according to the tenets of each community. Islam is best served by the sword of kindness, not by the sword of oppression." Babur's celebrated autobiography reflects exactly the same spirit of inclusiveness and generosity. Today, we know that the megaphone has been seized by the merchants of hate. But desirable levels are not everything. The murmurs for friendship and the quest entreaties to the Almighty for peace constitute another real story. In the end, it will also be, God willing, a more powerful story. May wisdom, peace, courage, and sanity descend on the people and the leaders of the world.
Thank you, Rubab. Thank you very much. Okay, and now we're going to go on to our final speaker for the day. So let me just get up his biography. Porter Clements is one of the co-founders of Interfaith Exchange. He has a degree in social anthropology, also from the University of St. Andrews. He was raised in a Protestant Christian tradition, but after discovering the writings of some Zen masters, he now identifies with Zen Buddhism. He also spent a month in a monastery in the Netherlands, which served as the topic of his undergraduate dissertation. So Porter, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ryan. And I'd like to echo Mary's words. Thank you to our guests for joining us today. Really exciting to have you guys on. So as Rahim mentioned, my academic background is in anthropology. And so what I'd like to talk to everyone about today comes from a little bit of a different perspective. As an anthropologist, I'm most interested in how everyday people are living their lives. And particularly right now in the pandemic, as a religious person, I'm interested in how the pandemic is affecting the way that we're living our lives religiously. So on that topic, of course, broadly speaking, the pandemic is a really major problem in its own right. But I think something that a lot of us are talking about right now is also how the pandemic has highlighted and exacerbated other issues which already existed in societies. So one of these problems that I've noticed has been the growing degree of individualization, particularly amongst people my age in our generation. Young people right now are ever more independent, and with regard to institutional authorities, likely to be skeptical. So is this something that religious institutions have really accounted for? Precisely speaking, do young people feel that religious institutions as they exist today are relevant for them and the way that they live their lives? One of the things which I believe we can see happening right now is the way that religious institutions are in turn finding ways to meet those needs because of the pandemic. Just as how in the political context of the United States, the pandemic is forcing us to reckon with, for example, our broken healthcare system and systemic racism. I'd like to suggest that you could draw a parallel with religious institutions. The pandemic is leading such institutions in the direction of catching up with the possibilities of technology vis-a-vis personalized religious experiences. So again, I'd like to draw on my personal experience. And this is something which I have experience with in the context of the Buddhist community. As Rahim mentioned, I'm a Zen Buddhist. And for background, Zen is a form of Buddhism practiced in Japan, and which in the years since the Second World War has spread beyond the borders of Japan and is broadly practiced in the West. This spread has manifested in the establishment of Zen communities and practice centers such as monasteries all around the world. And one such center is called Zen River. And as Rahim mentioned, it's where I've spent about 5 weeks, and it was the subject of my undergraduate dissertation. But since leaving there, I've kept in touch with the monastery, in particular with certain monks with whom I became very close during my stay. And it's been really interesting to see how they've adapted to the crisis. Now, as someone who doesn't live anywhere near the Netherlands, but who has sort of constant contact with the monastery, I'm actually a very normal Zen Buddhist. Most of the monastery's visitors are returners who have a breadth of experience with the temple and consider themselves to be part of the extended family. This is because Zen is pretty fringe religious practice right now in the West. So most of us live outside of the Netherlands, who are in contact with this particular community. So in that sense, the monastery, I kind of think of it as a paradigmatic example of globalized religion today. So that's kind of the lens from which I sort of approach thinking about it with regard to the pandemic. So before the pandemic, the monastery was always bounded by one location, which was the physical site of the monastery. But the pandemic has created an impetus for the monastery to find new solutions because people can't travel to the monastery. Visitors can't flock in from far away via airplane to meditate and pray together in person. So they've had to explore ways of catering to its community remotely. For example, they've begun to stream their daily services online, to hold online group discussions over Zoom, much like we are today, and distributing their scriptural lectures over film. There have even been remote online meditation retreats in which visitors are able to consult one-on-one with a temple abbot via FaceCam, all of which is really interesting. And I think it yields insight into actually the nature of religious institutions and what they offer to people. So obviously, you know, broadly speaking, one's personal internal experience is, you know, a central facet of any religious practice, right? So how we practice individually and internally is, you know, something which exists independently of our communities. But really, just as importantly as the independent aspect of religion is the communal. And this is something that I think religious institutions give us. And I think it's what we seek in religious institutions. So returning to my personal experience, I can be a Buddhist wherever I am in the world. Obviously, meditating is easy enough in isolation and sometimes preferable. But so much of what appealed to me personally about the monastery has been its capacity to unite me with like-minded others, people with whom I can share my experiences and ideas. It's a community. However, as a 22-year-old, I was an outlier at the monastery when I stayed there. So this kind of raises the question, might religious institutions as we know them give community in the way that alienates young people? Returning to my original point, we are becoming ever more individualized in the way we experience and think about our lives as over the course of time. And I believe this extends to religion. Now, I think, is the time that we seek ways of communing with each other that fit in with who we are and where we are in society today. With a pandemic, religious institutions, as my monastery, are called to investigate ways of providing community, almost paradoxically, to physically distinct individuals. How can we create community in isolation? I think it's possible that as religious institutions seek to answer this question, unwittingly they're addressing a far more consequential issue than they realize. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Porter. Okay, so now, if I'm just going to mute you, sorry. So now we're going to move over to the question and answer section. We've also had some questions coming in on Facebook, so we'll get to them towards the end. And just to remind everyone, I'm going to ask some general questions, and I'm gonna pick on some people, but I also, if anyone wants to ask another person a question in response to something they said, just put your hand up using the Zoom function. So my first question is picking up off something both Porter and Hussain mentioned. Porter, you talked about how people are perhaps, especially young people, are becoming individualized and they're becoming skeptical almost of religious institutions. And Hussain, you talked about the Westphalian order. And so my question is related to secularism. And I want to, in the West, in the UK, for example, in Europe, we're witnessing a trend of secularization. People are identifying less with religion. So my question to Hussain first, and then Porter, you can also give your thoughts on this. Why do you think the world is becoming less religious? So yeah, why do you think we're secularizing?
Thanks for that question, but my counter question is, what world are you speaking of? Are you talking about the West or the East? Because in the East, since 9/11, there was a surge in religiosity. We have seen even people around us who are becoming more and more closer to God, closer to religious institutions. So that has been the case in, for instance, Pakistan. If you look at across the border in India, you'll see the same trend, where there is a surge in religiosity, affiliation to religious institutions. So that's one. But at the same time, it doesn't end over there. In the last at least 10 years or something, during my travels and when I was living in Australia and in the US, I noticed another thing, that while people in the Western countries are disassociating themselves from religious institutions and established orders, it's not that they're going agnostic. They're moving from the religious institutions of the West, finding answers in the institutions in the East, the mysticism. So they're moving towards spirituality. I don't personally think there are more yoga centers in California than probably in India and Thailand combined right now. There are yogas that I've even heard of, dance yoga, exercise yoga, you name it. We have every sort of yoga. So I kind of believe that what you see in the Western world right now, be it in Australia, be it in Scandinavian countries, is a shift away from the Abrahamic religious order, maybe the Christianity, and finding answers in the Eastern mysticism. And I think there is a very good reason for that as well, because what is eventually religion? Religion essentially is answering some of those fundamental questions of life, reality, our existence, why we feel anxiety, why we are not happy. So those answers, I don't personally think the Abrahamic religions, having studied them and studying the Eastern religions, they don't offer uh, detailed insights onto those specific elements of metaphysics and spirituality. You look at Buddhism, you look at Hinduism, you look at Jainism, you will find a very, very sophisticated and detailed understanding on how what's body, what's the soul, what's the difference, how to live in a life and all of that. And even when we talk about Islam, Islam came to India and it merged with the local ideology over here and it transformed into Sufism, which essentially was the mysticism that is there. So I would disagree on the point that people are moving away from religion. I feel that they're moving away from one set of religion and finding answers into a very different set of religious ideology. And it's understandable because I think one of the things that we neglect over here is that in India and these regions that we live in, Pakistan, we have had a very sophisticated and developed societies. Our cuisines, our religious thought, our spirituality, they're very well advanced. So our ideas on what the purpose of life is way beyond from 9 to 5 investment banking job that you have in the US. So for us, it's way beyond that. So I think I would like to respond to those lines.
Thank you, Hussain, for that. Porter, I think you put your hand up, so I think you have something to say. But I think Hussain was almost talking about your situation as someone who comes from a Christian background and has found solace, I suppose, in the Eastern traditions. And so, yeah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot of what I'd like to say will echo what Hussain has already said. And I'd like to clarify certain points from the perspective of someone who grew up in the United States. And again, I do think it's important the distinction Hussain raised between East and West. So, if we're talking about secularization, I'm going to be talking about my experience having lived in the United Kingdom and the United States. And I think it is important that we don't generalize. But just on that point, I would agree with Hussain's perspective that I actually don't think we're becoming less religious in the West. I think we're becoming less institutional in the West. I think that a lot of the sort of traditional institutions which we've had are losing relevance for people today. And that's from my perspective, something which is part of the sort of constant process of evolutionary change that happens in societies as the world changes, which it has constantly done. And it's something that I think if you actually look back historically isn't a new phenomenon. I think we sort of always have to reinvent ourselves. I think that's part of the human condition. But also I think that something I'd like to point out just on the topic of the sort of search for religious significance and religious meaning. Another important thing to take into consideration is that there's actually a lot of really new and exciting ways that Western religions are finding new forms. So, for example, one of my favorite musicians, who's a really important musician, I think, in the context of American society, is Kendrick Lamar, and he's a rapper from the West Coast of the United States, and he has a very political message about what it means to be Black in America, but it's also a message about what it means to be a Christian. And the way he talks about Christianity doesn't necessarily correspond with a specific institutional framework for what Christianity is, but it's relevant and it's real, and it's something that comes from who we are today, right now. So I suppose, religion is something which for me isn't set or rigid. It's actually something that we are always reinventing.
Thank you, Porter. So coming off those 2 points, very interesting. I find you two agreeing to be slightly. I want someone to disagree with you. So, Rubab, you studied law and you are aware of secularism in the West. You've lived in the UK. So my question is, somewhere like France, for example, France is a country which completely relegates the religion to the private sphere, right? And so my question is, do you think that is conducive? Do you think that sort of secularism is conducive to a society where religious harmony is the norm? Oh, you're muted still. Could you ask? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm grateful for being British. And as I understand it, secularism is not the same as nihilism. And in its true spirit, I do not see that there is a clash between secularism and religious values at all. So basically, I mean, when we speak about secularism and when we speak about religious values, for example, when you look at things like the treaties of or the Constitution of Medina, which was drafted by His Holiness. It's basically talking about equality and for everyone to have, for everyone to have the basic dignity. It's all about human dignity. It's about equality. And that is what secularism is about. And I do not necessarily see a clash between secularism or religious values. As for the question on religion and whether we are becoming more or less, first of all, I do not see the world from the lens of West and East. I do not sign up to a clash of civilization. And as a Porter, I hope I'm not pronouncing that wrong, basically, I totally agree. That people seem, religion is about seeking a meaning. It's, where people are trying to find a meaning to their life. So I do agree that there has been a shift from large places of worship, like very large mosques or, from large cathedrals to smaller groups, where people find there to be more intimacy. And very quickly, if I were to add that most of the religions the neighborhood principle, for example, that is common between all the Abrahamic traditions. And for example, when there is this, for example, when you have to go for Friday prayer, there is this thing that you have to go to your closest mosque. But when it comes to some important prayers, you have to go to the biggest mosque of the city. And the whole purpose of doing that is that they are meant to be aware of what's going on in the city and to be aware of what's going around you, and to be sympathetic and to be caring and to take the welfare and well-being of those around you. And so most of these Abrahamic traditions, they have these shared values. They have the neighborhood principle, where especially during this pandemic, we have seen. I'm not basically talking about the policies of faith institutions, but we have seen places of worship coming forward and reaching out to the people.
Thank you, Rubab. I'm just going to ask you to mute yourself again. Okay, so my next question is for Mary. So Mary, as someone who identifies as agnostic, I want to get your thoughts on some criticism that some people might make of agnosticism. So some people might say that you're basically an atheist, but you're just too cowardly to accept that you are an atheist, or you're just you're sitting on the fence. But on the other side, some other people might say that there's a level of humility in saying, I don't know. So what are your thoughts of that? And maybe link it to the secular society that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, if I had £1 for every time somebody told me it was the coward's way out, I think I'd be a millionaire by this point. No, it's a hard one. I feel like sometimes I kind of drift towards being a believer, but I'm the kind of person who thinks that unless I have, 100% conviction, that I'm not going to pretend that I'm a believer when I'm not. If anything, it does an injustice to believers who, fully practice their religion and believe in a God for me to claim that I'm a believer. So yeah, I mean, it's a position that I didn't always have. Like, I was religious at school and then I changed my mind at university. But for anybody at home, like, agnosticism literally means that humans cannot know that God exists or that gods exist, and that it's unknowable to humans through rationality and reason. And I've found that to be the most convincing argument. You may sometimes feel like, I sometimes feel like I want to believe in a God when I see things happening in the world, but at the same time, I also see a lot of things that make me believe that God doesn't exist. So if you think that's sitting on the fence, that's fine with me. But I'd rather, not commit to something if I don't fully believe in it. But in terms of like talking about growing secularism today, I think agnostics and atheists as well should have more of a position in interfaith dialogue, because increasingly, certainly in the UK, people are less religious than they used to be, I would say, especially young people. And if we represent quite a large population, it's not only tension between religions, but it's tension between believers and non-believers that's also an issue. So I think people like myself have to learn to be able to talk to believers with respect, even if I don't believe that there is a God. It's not, that one of us is right or wrong, but it's the ability to be able to talk to other people regardless of the different beliefs that you have. So I think it is really important that we open up this interfaith dialogue to everybody, every faith background or no faith background, because there's still an issue about the way in which people interact with each other. Like at university, I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was a lot of judgment on people who are religious. And also believers have a lot of judgment for non-believers. So I think this is the kind of tensions, it goes both ways. But I think that's the kind of thing that needs to be improved through interfaith dialogue. So
there's just a follow-up question to that, Mary. So you mentioned number one, the situation at universities, people dismissing other people for being religious, being judgmental. And you also mentioned that you yourself don't, as an agnostic, don't think you can't prove God through rationality, right? So do you think, therefore, that religious people are, not you personally perhaps, but more generally, are religious people considered to be unintelligent because they can't rationally prove their beliefs? Or I would even challenge that statement itself. Perhaps, do you think that perhaps religious people could rationally defend their beliefs, just you haven't come across a fair enough reason yet?
Yeah, I think there's a problem, and this, goes back a long time, and particularly since the Enlightenment, is this like false dichotomy between religion and science. And we all know that people, whether they're scientists or religious, can be equally intelligent. And there are different ways through which a scientist and a religious person will come to their conclusions, but that doesn't mean that one way is better than the other. They're different. And I think there are a lot of stereotypes about religious people being irrational or unintelligent, but I don't personally believe that's true. I just know that the way that I come to a conclusion might be different to the way somebody else on this panel comes to a conclusion. And that doesn't make me feel that I'm better than they are. It's just my belief. And I'm kind of a strong believer in, live and let live. And that's particularly important when you live in a country such as ours or in the US, where you have such a cosmopolitan country. You know, you can't be so exclusionary about the way that people come to conclusions, the way that they use their logic or whatever. So yeah, I'd say it's definitely a problem, but I don't believe in the kind of hierarchy of intelligence or that kind of thing. So.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of our speakers talked about, Hussain specifically talked about people veering towards spirituality and mysticism, and perhaps that's linked to rejection of religious institutions and their authority. We've had a question on Facebook come in from somebody, Hussain, for you. He's asking, you've talked about this from religion to spirituality or mysticism. What comes next, or what comes next after that, or what's the general direction you think that society is taking and where we'll end up? You can say I don't know, but
I think from a spiritual perspective, I would say unification. But you see, I think we're rather a difficult question to answer in a way, because it's definitely one thing that I think there are two things to this. One is the Western sciences, the experimental sciences that are there. And then there is an Eastern world where there is experiential sciences. You can't think, you experience them. And the whole idea is to actually experience those things. The world where we're going right now, I believe the way I see mental health issues going on in Western and Eastern societies both, the way the capitalist system has kind of enslaved the people, and how the economies and how the large populace is kind of becoming more and more disconnected and more detached from reality. Certain surge that we're seeing from the 70s actually, but more so right now. And with a growing population around the world, this will be a lot more prevalent. You'll see a more inward-looking society, the angels who are looking and who are looking at the stars and galaxies, that will be there. But I think the finding answers to the outside world through inside is going to be the core idea. And I think even in a society like Pakistan, for instance, which is very religious society, which is very large populace that is practicing religion, reading 5 namaz a day and all of that, even that's I've now noticed that more within the elite class specifically, you have these yoga centers erupting, people who are doing breathing exercises, trying to integrate mysticism into their lives, their practices. I think we're heading is more of a unification around me, not even in just the cities, but generally more interested in finding wherever, because these of the digital media, books, and online access to works of the other people. I think there is a lot of crossover now where people are finding answers everywhere. I mean, I started reading Mahabharata and Ramayana when I was 16, and 5 years back I opened Buddhism, and I absolutely found it fascinating what I read in Buddhism, because at the end of the day, even as a practicing Muslim who I am, I can still connect and find answers within different religions, be it Hindu, would be Buddhism. And I think that the whole idea labeled as one religion from the other religion, Muslim, but you could love Islam as well as your something you found in Jainism. I think where we're heading is a more mixture, a melting pot of different ideologies, different religion, a lot to do with how technology is shaping all of this ideology as well. So I'm not sure exactly where we will land, but I do know that we're on the right path to self. That's the most important point.
Thank you very much for that. Am I cutting off, or is Hussain cutting off? I'm not sure. I had a bit of trouble there. But anyway, my question now is, you mentioned mental health. So I want to ask I want to open this up to everybody, basically. Rubab, maybe you could talk about this. Mental health is something which has gained a lot more acceptance in the UK, at least. It's much more comfortable and easy to talk about mental health today. But what do you think is the relationship between religion and mental health? How can religion or spirituality improve our mental health? So, and also a linked question, how has COVID perhaps influenced people's mental health? And how has faith again contributed to perhaps alleviating some difficulties? Mary, did you have your hand up? Yeah, we'll start with Mary then.
I think religion and spirituality is kind of a double-edged sword when it comes to mental health. I've heard some horror stories, from various religious traditions, whether it's any of the Abrahamic traditions, where people have had mental health conditions because they're not able to express themselves or their identity, whether it's to do with sexuality or gender, to their parents or to their family because of their religious background. And I think that's played a strong role in causing a lot of issues for a lot of young people, certainly in our generation, because though we're very open with one another, there are a lot of parents out there who are not accepting of their children. But I also think that certainly other religions, particularly Buddhism and religions like that they have that kind of focus on spirituality, such that you're kind of trained to get rid of negative emotions, and it's about being the master of your emotions. And so practicing meditation and things like that, actually you're able to process all of those problems that might be causing you to have mental health problems, and you're able to deal with it more effectively that way. But I think, you can't have those kind of stereotypes about religions, So for example, my grandfather, he was a clergyman, and he was perhaps the most liberal in terms of Christianity that I ever knew. He would have no judgment about anyone whatsoever. And that was based on the Bible. So it's really down to interpretation. And I don't think you can say religion generally causes mental health conditions or religion generally alleviates mental health conditions. So I think it's more down, to the individual luck as to whether you are born with parents who are able to accept you for who you are or not. And I think religion has, the opportunity to either alleviate those problems or create worse ones, I'd say.
Okay, so a lot of it's down to interpretation. That's interesting. I'm gonna ask Porter a question. So Porter, is potentially not, you don't have to answer this personally, but Mary mentioned something like the Eastern traditions with their focus on meditation and on basically knowing yourself and controlling your thoughts. In your experience, has meditation, or in your people in their experiences, has it helped improve your mental health, or has it had any sort of impact on your mental health? Yeah.
So I think something that's important to emphasize here is that you talked about the sort of recent emergence of mental health as a legitimate issue, as being a sort of recent phenomenon. And I'd like to just draw attention to the fact that I think that fact is like really, really inextricable with or from the emergence of, for me, Buddhism as a historical phenomenon in the United States and in the UK, where I'm familiar. I think that a lot of people, find things like Buddhism in the context of, talking and exploring ideas of mental health. So the two really do go hand in hand in that sense, I think. But, I think there is also an issue which I can talk about from my personal experience, having spent time in a Buddhist community as well. I think that it's really just echoing what Mary said. It's a double-edged sword. So but in a different way, where people come to Buddhism and they sort of look for a solution to all of their problems, and I think that so I've one of the sort of experiences I had when I was staying at the monastery was that, you know, when I was there as an anthropologist, so I was really talking to people and interviewing people a lot, and I actually heard a lot of stories about, particularly with people who had experience going to Japan and you know, practicing Zen Buddhism in Japan, where, you know, people have really difficult, you know, sort of breakdowns in the context of, you know, like really like pushing themselves to solve all of their problems through meditation in a way which actually doesn't really fall within the, you know, the sort of framework that, you know, these sort of Buddhist practices prescribe. So I think that, you know, it's something which requires caution. And I think I think there are a lot of really powerful tools that, you know, these sort of traditions offer us. But it's also something that, and this is really emphasized within Buddhism, that it's something that does come from within ultimately. You know, it's something that you do yourself. It's not something that comes from the outside. And I think a lot of the time people, and, you know, this is something that I can talk about from my experience, people do look for answers from the outside in a way which it can be a bit of a rude awakening, you know, to sort of get there and be told, well, no, you know, it's actually something that you have to do. You know, it's a sort of work. But then also something I'd like to end off just by saying is that I think it's something that I don't actually see as different about Buddhism from, let's say, Abrahamic traditions. And, you know, I have a lot of really close friends who are, you know, practicing Christians in a really, you know, traditional sense, for whom, you know, the church is actually something which is really instrumental to their mental health. And, you know, I don't think it's something that's specific to Buddhism in any sense.
Thank you. Rubab, you have something to say? I also have a question for Rubab. So is there a question you have or a comment?
No, it was just a quick comment, if I may, that, you know, somehow we, you know, mental exercise is as important as physical exercise, something that is not said very often, and something that unfortunately, you know, we seem to miss out in the schools as well. It's about mental exercises that you have, which are as important as the physical exercises, like the numeracy and all the different tools that are available. And like you said, I share your concern, and you know, unfortunately, even in the UK, mental health is still pretty much stigmatized. But you do have a lot of help available, and you do have, you know, but you know, in terms of, I wish there was more study, and, you know, we are talking generally, and we do talk about rights, but unfortunately, world over, there hasn't been a study on societal attitudes towards these issues. But very quickly, I wanted to add that, you know, one of the issues, because I'm I'm speaking from a country which is known to be the happiest countries, one of the happiest countries in the world. And, you know, and why is that? I mean, we've been stuck by poverty. We've been, you know, you just name it, and we've been through it. But why are we still so happy? And there's just one slight difference, if I may, that I have noticed, that, you know, the family institution is very strong. And I think the biggest drug for a human being is not, the biggest drug for a human being is another human being. And it is, you know, instead of, I'm not trying to nullify any concept at all, but instead of talking to trees, what if we decided to speak and to extend our hand of compassion to another human being, speak to a stranger, learn about their struggle, learn about their journeys. And very often there's a saying that when you think about and when you speak to people who have less than you have, then your gratitude kind of, you know, your gratitude kind of increases. You know, very often when I'm in Pakistan, I am told to think about others, and your family comes first and everybody else comes first. And in UK, one of the things that is good is that people very often ask how I am, what my identity is. And I think that that is very important. But at the same time, all of this notion of loving thyself, leaving whatever is not serving you, all of this, I think at the end of the day, if we keep on thinking and if our focus is very inward looking, then we will just end up alone in life, and all we will have is ourselves. So I think, which is what brings people with religious belief or no religious beliefs into the equation, because fundamentally all religions, for example, the God I know, that God forgives his rights, but he does not forgive me being hurting another human, and that obviously includes people who have no faith. And very quickly, sorry, I seem to be waffling my way through, but I would like to wholeheartedly accept and appreciate Mary's point on the inclusiveness and the spirit of human inclusiveness that we need to show towards the people who have no religion. And at the conferences that we've had at that we've been organizing in the British Houses of Parliaments, we have been including people with no religious beliefs as well.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Rubab. That was really motivational to hear, actually. Hussain, I have a question for you. Coming back to something you said in your initial statement, you mentioned how interfaith work has historically focused on the similarities and how you believe it's also important to focus on the differences. My question is, imagine I'm somebody who believes that my way of life, my religion is the truth, right? And I don't think any of you are right. And I think you're all wrong and that you're all going to be damned for eternity, right? How do you convince someone like me to engage in conversations where we can learn to coexist in a harmonious manner?
Thank you, Ryan. That was a tough one. The problem with the interfaith dialogue so far has been that we're already kind of preaching to the converts already. So people who are already tolerant, who are already inclusive, I think we're just gathering them together and we're talking good stuff, and that works out. The actual people who have a different worldview, we don't even invite them most of the times. And when we invite them, it's done in a way where I'm sure there are different experiences people have differently, but it's done in a way which is not conducive to bringing out any specific understanding or any specific rapprochement between each other. Now, coming specifically to the point where you make that, how do you deal with a person who doesn't want to talk, for instance, who has a completely different opinion on homogeneity, on peace, on tolerance and all? It's an extreme situation, and you'll find very, very rarely that such people exist in the society. Even in a country like Pakistan, you could talk to the most extremist of the people that are here, and they will still believe that, no, you see, Christians are not wrong, Judaism, Jewish people are not wrong, Hindus are not wrong in a lot of ways. However, they don't believe in certain practices that they have. For instance, an average Muslim person would probably tell you that, oh, I believe that they're fine in all of that. There is no problem. Yet, the way they have corrupted their religion, now that's his opinion, that he believes that the religion has been corrupted and they're distracted, and hence we are probably going to be doing a tabligh to make sure that those people come to the right path. Now, this is somebody who has a very hardcore ideology. I have yet to see, even in the extremist ideology, I mean, forget about a few hundreds of these Al-Qaedas or the terrorist organization, that again is political. But by and large, any community, I have a lot of Jewish friends, I have a lot of Christian friends, I have a lot of Hindu friends. Nobody really says that, oh, we are the best people, we are going to heaven, rest everybody is going to hell, and we don't want to engage with you. Because the society has become so interconnected and so interlinked, I think we've gone past that stage where this was us versus them. Despite the fact that since 9/11, the entire high politics of the world forced people to go into that direction where it was us versus Islam, East versus West. I think majority of the people now, specifically in the digital age, I mean, look at just us, somebody sitting in the US, I'm sitting in Pakistan, somebody's in the UK. I think we've gone past that age where we have to be bothered with that question on dealing with a person who's completely not interested in talking. There might be a few people in the UK, some of the extremist Muslim communities over there, who might have that view, but then again, they're living and abiding by the law. It's very rare that they create a very big problem in the UK.
Thank you for that. Rubab, I want to come back to you. Hussain mentioned that there are very few people perhaps who are completely opposed to this kind of dialogue. But I believe that unfortunately you've received threats in your life as part of through organizing interfaith events. So my question to you is, what motivates you? You've worked on something like the Asia Bibi case, for which people were assassinated. You've spoken out for the rights of minorities, Shias and Ahmadis and Christians. What gives you the motivation? How does perhaps religion play into the courage you have to stand up for the oppressed and people who are so beleaguered in society, when it comes with the risk of being threatened and having your life put at risk?
Okay, so please forgive me because I'm struggling with a slightly bad internet connection. So I hope I heard your questions correctly. I think on the first question of interfaith, I totally agree that the circle seems to be quite small. But recently in the UK, I'm not trying to say this, but recently there was this mainstream campaign by the media and religious media where they were trying to identify those people who have been working with other people. So that was kind of mainstreaming it a bit. So I would like to acknowledge the efforts that are being made in reaching out to the mainstream and to be reaching out to those. So this was where people were recommending the people who they thought were breaking down barriers between communities. And I'm not saying this because I was one of them, but it was quite a kind of a genuine attempt to reach out to the mainstream. As far as your other question is concerned, basically it is my faith that inspires me, and the religious figure that I follow is Imam Hussain, and the council that I am the chairwoman of, it basically has a Jewish rabbi. It basically had one agnostic, our patron was agnostic, we have a Christian, we basically have all the Abrahamic traditions, and we have an agnostic, so that fits in very well with Mary's description. And I think it is my faith that inspires me to speak for all oppressed, and not to think of people from the lens of othering them, to think that your compassion should include everybody, and there are no others when it comes to human rights. I do not see anybody as an other, be it any, as far as, because the last words of Imam Hussain, and this is again my very, well, he was wearing a coffin when he said, is there anybody who's going to speak for the poor? And he was not speaking for himself, he was basically speaking for all oppressed. So whenever I see an oppressed person, be it from any race, any religion, any color, I see it as responding to the call of the figure that I follow, that it is my duty to stand with the poor, it is my duty to stand with the persecuted. And beyond Islam also, when you think about Jesus, at the end of the day, he sat with prostitutes, he sat with the poor. And all of these people, they were a minority because they were always standing with the persecuted. So this is a very personal perspective that I've shared, but yes, your faith can inspire you to do good things.
Thank you very much, Rubab. I'd like to move on now to the topic of leadership, okay? And so Rubab and Hussain, you're both leaders in your fields. And so I want to ask the question, um, first to Hussain, how has you've taken part in some interfaith work whilst in the States. How do you think being faith aware and being, informed about other people's belief, how important do you think, number one, it is to being a good leader, whether that be on the community level or the national level or anywhere in between? And secondly, in Pakistan, how well informed are people about other people's beliefs? So how well are Muslims informed about Christian beliefs? How well are Sunnis informed about Shia beliefs, and vice versa? And any other group which you want to talk about?
Thanks, Ryan. On the leadership part of the faith and interfaith dialogue, and I think there is a very fine line that you have to walk. In the past couple of years, at least, I think ever since the NGO business became big, one of the things that I've noticed, and I was talking on the other day in a different webinar about this issue, is that under the counter violent extremism and preventing violent extremism programs that we saw by the British government and the US government, that's when you see these different interfaith dialogues that started happening across the world, because there was a more need to build bridges and all of that. But they also, as good as they are in the noble intentions that were there, they at times become, they're at risk in a way on developing a particular agenda of a particular individual, a particular thought process. I would name a particular NGO or an interfaith dialogue, but in the Australian, when I was working with the Australian government on the subject, we realized that a lot of the interfaith dialogue was basically a hoax. They were taking the government grants, $30,000, $50,000 a year, and a lot of interfaith work was essentially a local cleric or a specific judge bringing in their friends and family for a dinner and a good event, and just doing nothing at all. So the problem is that how do you do the impact assessments of these programs? So what I'm trying to bring on to is that just like human rights, minority rights, and other so many rights have become politicized in the larger debate that we sometimes see. They've been used, I mean, the whole idea of human rights was used to actually go into Iraq. A lot of these other rights issues become very radicalized and politicized. I feel that a lot of times when these programs are structured and interfaith is done backed by the government, I become very suspicious of that. Partly because then it becomes small shops for individuals to run their version of what they think is good or what they think is bad. It might be generalization, but there is a risk that is involved with it. And we've seen with the British government, with the American government, and in the Australian government. All across these three governments, we realize that a lot of times with the government's involvement in interfaith, the contracting business and the consulting mafias, they started mushrooming. So we need to be steering clear of these issues, because interfaith is something very delicate and it has to be people to people, and the government could be a facilitator. But if the government involves itself with $10 million grant, then you're kind of like diluting and attracting all sorts of wrong people to do interfaith dialogue because they're more interested in the other things. So I believe that grassroots movements need to be supported who have been doing this sort of work and have a uh, particular, I would say, something to show in terms of their progress and something to show as results. So I think that's one very important part on the leadership angle. And I think the second question that you asked was, I'm sorry, I didn't get that one.
How well informed are our
Okay.
Pakistani citizens about other Pakistani citizens' beliefs? So Muslims about Christians, Shia, Sunnis, Ahmadis, so on.
I think part of the big problem that has happened in Pakistan is this thing that we have not really studied different religions at the school level. So you have 98% Muslim population that has studied only Islam and a particular version of Islam in the school. So an average Pakistani would have no clue about Judaism except for what he has been told. For the Abrahamic faith, we still have certain idea, but again, those are very much biased and prejudiced. That all Christians think this way, all Jewish people think this way, all Hindus think this way. I think that that absence of education at the very secondary and primary level there's no true knowledge within the people on different religions. Some lucky people who are able to study abroad, or who were able to be passionate enough to use Google research and other stuff to read about the religion, they were separate. But by and large, I would say 99% of the population only have ideas about other faith and religions based on what they've been told by somebody else, who've been told by somebody else. So I think it's very, very low. And that is where the real problem is, because then that creates into a very negative sentiment, and radicalization happens. And on top of that is, it becomes, the overall society becomes very intolerant.
Okay, Rubab, I believe you have something to say, a comment.
Yeah, very quickly, I wanted to comment on the government aspect, that the roles of the government has become important, especially when we see in terms of conflicts. And from a macro level, when you look at, as I said earlier, that we cannot talk about peace up until the time there is peace between religions. And some might argue that there may not be a conflict between religions, that it's all politicized. But then the reality is also that there are some people who do not want to be talking about peace at all. And it is at a government level that those talks can be initiated, and some very good work has been done at government level as well. And I would like to reiterate that it's important, dialogue is important. It is important for people to talk and to continue to talk, even if those talks are just about talks. And every initiative at every level, I would like to wholeheartedly welcome Hussain's comment on engaging with the grassroots. But I think dialogue which brings harmony between religions has to be supported at all levels. And again, very quickly, I'm so sorry for disagreeing again, but I think I was prompted to disagree by Rahim. When it comes to Pakistan, unfortunately, it's like I have a very different version, because I did my O-levels only when I was at the age of 13, and at our school, we were taught all the world religions. We were taught about ancient world civilizations, all the civilizations, you name it. And somehow I saw a picture where at any normal religious function, you would have people not just Googling each other, but they would be celebrating with each other, and they would be together in each other's joys and sorrows. For example, at any event, we would see the participation of the Christians, we would see the participation of the Hindus. And then you think, I'm not trying to speak from a point of privilege, then you think that there is no problem in Pakistan at all. But this is something that I thought, because of my own experience, because I went to this school where I was getting all this education, and because in the events that I was attending, I saw everybody together. So I thought that there is no problem at all. But I think coming to Hussain's point, I think what the real issue is, that people need to be coming out of it's more about class rather than religion, because I think people need to be coming out of their bubble of affluence, and they need to be reaching out to the masses and to the grassroots levels to see what is going on in their country, rather than just and again, it's about reaching out to the grassroots. It's about much more, again, like I said, equality, more in terms of economy, more in terms of taking the minorities into the mainstream fold economically, welfare, from the legal systems. And I think we're talking about a place where we don't have where we have equality, where we don't have Pakistan's but a Pakistan. So I'm basically talking about breaking the bubble of affluence that we have, and I see it as a class divide rather than a divide between religions when it comes to Pakistan.
Thank you, Rubab. Porter, I believe Porter has some comments to make on this now.
Thank you. It was really interesting just hearing Hussain and Rubab's comments on this issue, and hearing these sort of really different perspectives on the state of things in Pakistan. Because, and I would actually just really like to quickly juxtapose what both of you have just said with my perspective on the state of interfaith dialogue in America, in the US. Because I think there are actually a lot of parallels, and I think that we might actually be really touching on something that's almost, you know, probably a lot broader, and maybe perhaps more fundamental. That's, you know, sort of a paradigmatic issue in interfaith work, which is that so obviously, you know, the United States is an incredibly intolerant country in a lot of ways, and in particular, I think that's something that you see in the media. So a lot of the dialogue that happens on television is really poor quality of interfaith exchange. So you know, there was an intense degree of Islamophobia in the United States, especially in the wake of 9/11. And you know, I live in New York, so this was, you know, this is an area where that was really, really strong. So I sort of saw this, in retrospect, I see a lot of ignorance in the United States on a really broad level. But at the same time, I've had really incredible experiences just personally growing up, and in a lot of similar ways, it sounds like to what Rubab was describing. So I can see how perhaps there are issues in the degree of, let's say, education or interfaith exchanges on a broad macro level, while at the same time, I think that we can all find in our own experiences the seeds of a better future, which do already exist, and I think it's sort of upon us to nurture those seeds. But I do think that we have the potential to create something better.
Thank you, Walter. We're coming up to 3:30, so I'm going to just ask one more question and maybe ask each person to give a 1-minute response to it. So my last question is, all of you have lived in societies where there are people of multiple different faiths, and you've interacted with these people. How important and in what ways do you think these sorts of interactions, actually getting to know the other person as a human being, even if you don't necessarily agree with their beliefs or you come from a completely different background, how important do you think that is to having meaningful interfaith conversations and creating a harmonious multicultural and interfaith society? Who wants to begin with that? Put your hand up. Okay, Mary wants to start.
I think I wouldn't necessarily, you know, claim that my upbringing is the model one. I would say I was very fortunate in that I was exposed to a lot of different people, and we were taught, you know, by our parents and at our schools to treat people the same. And yeah, I think the main thing is you can achieve better things in the future through future generations if we all treat each other as humans first and foremost, because it's that way that we can empathize with other people and we can say, yes, we are people, we are the same, we're not different. It's when we focus on our differences, whether religious, cultural, national, that we start to get divided, and that's where I think the problems lie. And you know, at the end of the day, like, all of us here are from very different backgrounds, but I don't think we're particularly different people. And we share a lot of the same interests and things like that, and the same opinions. So yeah, I just finished by saying that the main thing is that you can be friends with other people and treat them as humans first, and then take an interest in their differences, but don't like judge somebody purely by those, I'd say.
Who's next? Any wave at the camera? I'm going to pick, okay, Porter, I'm picking on you, and I'm going to finish with Hussain, then Rubab.
I was actually about to volunteer, so we're on the same page, Ryan. I would like to say, I would argue that in fact, I think that starting on the level of person to person is really the only way to get anywhere, because, and again, you know, I'm such an anthropologist, I can't help it, I'm sorry, 4 years really, they got to me. But I would challenge the notion that there is such thing as a Christian, or that there is such thing as a Jew, or there is such thing as a Buddhist. Really, I think that to get to the heart of things, you need to address Rahim as who Rahim is as a Muslim, or me because we all actually really do practice our religions in distinct ways, and so I think that to have any sort of dialogue that's meaningful, you can't approach you as a Muslim, because you aren't a Muslim in a way that is sort of you can't generalize about that. So I think that actually if we are going to reach any sort of mutual understanding, we actually really need to find in each other how each of us sees the world, which everyone is going to do differently.
Typical anthropologist, everything is a social construction. I mean, what can I expect? You make a good point though. You should treat everyone on the level of individual, in the sense that I am speaking from my own experience. My own religious beliefs and practices are almost entirely unique from my family and my community and what I'm officially supposed to do. I mean, part of it comes from speaking to other people, part of it comes from personal study, but I definitely think everyone has the unique understanding of religion and of God and of the ultimate reality. So yeah, thank you for that point. That's it's very insightful. Hussain, do you have any thoughts on this?
Thanks for that. I agree with Porter that it has to start from individual basis, on individual to individual level. But at the same time, it's not only interfaith is not only an individual issue. Right? You can have a particular belief, and that's fine. But specifically in societies like the Eastern societies like Pakistan and India and Afghanistan and other places, faith is a lot to do with the group, the society, the tribe, the millions of people that are there. So you can be individualistic at your home and do what you want, but when it comes to the larger society, faith dictates certain things. What is not right. You can't then be at the individual level believe that it's not okay to have it's not halal to have pork in Islam, but because at the individual level I'm fine with that, I will have a little bit on the side at my home. So you won't find it. That's the whole problem. It just doesn't work that way. So faith has different individual level, you and your God. Then it's at the basic family unit, you and your family, and then at the society level. And then how the societies interact with different faiths over there in your country or in your city as well. So I think interfaith has to be done across all the aisles. It has to be done across all the levels. And there has to be targeted approach. What is that we're trying to get at? What is that we're trying to achieve? Is it a homogeneous world where all religions come together and follow one true path? Or is it that we want diversity, and that diversity will allow us to find different paths and come to a particular conclusion? So it's a cyclical process, and I think it's important for us to start seeing religion and unlearning it as a first thing, because the moment you start unlearning what you learned all your life, that opens up a particular space then to interact with a Christian or a Muslim or with a Jewish person in a way that doesn't come with a particular baggage. And I'm talking about a political baggage, because our generation, for instance, I'm 32 right now, and a lot of people of my age, we were born and raised, not born, but we were raised after 9/11. So we saw what happened and how something miserable that happened in New York didn't end over there. It had a direct effect on billions of people in our countries. It affected our faith. I remember when I was studying at GW in the US, I went to the airport and I landed in Washington, D.C. my first trip when I was going to college. They literally stripped me naked on the airport. I was 17. And that was because they were like, oh, so you're coming from Pakistan, Muslim sounding name, sir, you're going to go on the other line. They made me wait for like 6 hours and I was stripped naked, and then they checked me. in terms of like, they asked me silly questions if I belong to any terrorist organizations and all of that. And that was not just one case. For 4 years that I was going back to the US, every single time, somehow I was the only one getting randomly selected for an initial layer of security. So we've seen how a particular global event was transformed into a religious issue. And then anybody who looked like a Muslim, I mean, I know so many Sikh people who had to face discrimination and they were not even Muslims. So anybody with a beard and all of that, they were discriminated because of a religious bigotry that was there. And that was institutional, which was one of the big problems I was there. So I went to the US, and if I had that airport experience, the reason why I never ended up hating the US is because when I went to the US college, I saw the people and I realized that it's one of the most friendliest places in the world. So there was no such thing that I faced in the border. But for somebody in Pakistan or my Afghani friends or somebody over here who have never been to the US and they see only what they see on the TV, how can you not hate the United States? I mean, how can you not? How can you not hate the West for it has done? Because the religion, I mean, they're not going and net bombing Thailand or any other country. You see the Muslim countries, they're getting net bombed. So you tell them in the interfaith dialogue that this is not about religion, they don't buy that shit. They see the Muslim world burning and they do know that it is about religion. So I think across the level, I'm going to wrap it up over here, that we have to have a targeted approach across the level, but only when you have a particular narrative set. You can't continue to call Islamist terrorism. A lot of people ask over here that why don't they call some white guy shooting in the US as Christian terrorism? Why is it all Islamic terrorism? So I think these are fundamental wordings, the discourses, the images that are associated with these things that need to be said. I mean, every time there is a story on Muslim, it is associated with some ridiculous image of a burqa-cladded woman or a bearded guy who has like a gun with him or something. So these things need to be changed in Hollywood, in the mainstream Western media. And that is when there will be an environment where you can have an interfaith dialogue, which is divorced from the dirty ass politics that is going on at the high level. I'll stop at that and I hope it makes sense.
Thank you very much, Hussain. You brought up so many points that I wish we had more time to talk about, but hopefully you'll join us again sometime in the future and we can go through all of them. Rubab, final words for you. Go for it.
So very quickly, I would like to say that countries are not monolith, nor are religions. We should not sign up. I think I wouldn't sign up to a clash of civilizations. When we look at USA, when we look at Pakistan, when we look at UK, we have to identify and work with the peacemakers, with the bridge builders, and not give up hope, because someday, somehow, you will find somebody who speaks your language, and somebody in Afghanistan will definitely find somebody in USA who is very sympathetic towards them. Same thing. We should not, I mean, countries are not monolith. Please do not give up on bridge building. We have to cut down these barriers. And so far during this conversation, we have spoken about organized religion or the lack of. But I strongly believe that we have as many religions as people. And every person is different. And when I engage with a person, I do not look at their sect, I do not look at their religion or the lack of their religion. I engage with the human heart, because it is my belief that my God lives in the hearts of the people and how you make them feel.
Thank you, Rubab. That reminds me of a Persian proverb which says that there are as many paths to God as there are souls that he has created, which is, I think, a nice note to leave it on. Thank you, everybody over here for joining. Just stay online for a while. We'll just end this live stream in a bit. And thank you to everyone who's watched either live or who's watching the replay. Thank you for your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but be sure to follow us on our Facebook page and on our Twitter. And check out our website, interfaithexchange.org, where we regularly post some really interesting articles from people from multiple different backgrounds. And yeah, thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.